So let's just reiterate the strength of feeling that emerged at that meeting, principally survivors and survivors' representatives there in conversation with officials from that child sex abuse inquiry. Peter Saunders was the main voice speaking after the meeting from the National Association of People Abused in Childhood, and he made these comments a few moments ago.
We agreed pretty much unanimously that the current chair of the inquiry, Fiona Woolf, is someone that we would not be able to work with were she to remain in place. We also, and I think probably Ali from Lead A will be able to speak of the legal matters better, but we also feel that it's essential that this becomes a statutory inquiry with statutory powers. Otherwise, it renders the whole thing what is the point. And the remit also, we want the remit extended beyond just England and Wales, because this is a nationwide scourge that's affected many, many children, and the terms of reference also need to be looked at very carefully. But I think that's something that Ali or Liz would be able to comment more sort of appropriately on, being legal academia people. But you know, we've had a meeting, and I think there will be follow-up meetings, but we've had a voice today, and I think that was really, really important. And we now wait for the feedback from the Home Secretary, who we are assured is going to be fed with our thoughts and feelings immediately. Obviously, they are constrained in all sorts of ways, Andy. They are constrained. One thing that came across was that most of the survivor organisations, again, representing many other survivors, we're just a few voices, but there are millions of survivors. The current panel have all put their support behind Fiona Woolf, which of course compromises them in a way, but they did courteously listen to us. And they could hardly turn round at this point and say, we don't have faith in our boss, which in effect is what she is at the moment. But I think they listened sort of loud and clear. So we wait with interest as to the next move by the Home Secretary and/or Fiona Woolf.
So that was Peter Saunders from the National Association for People Abused in Childhood after that meeting. Let's get some reaction now. Keith Vaz, MP, is the chair of the Home Affairs Committee, joins us from Nottingham. Good afternoon, Mr Vaz.
Good afternoon, Julian.
On the strength of what you have just heard, what do you say Fiona Woolf should do now?
Well, to be frank, I didn't hear any of it, so I don't know what the conclusions were.
Well, let me help you on that. They're absolutely
you.
clear that they don't want her to be the chair of this committee.
Well, this is obviously a very serious development, which I'm sure she and the Home Secretary will want to consider very carefully. As we've said in the past, the role of the committee has been to try and get as much information into the public domain about what has been a very chaotic appointment system. And the meeting with the victims was extremely important as part of that process. To be frank, this should have been done before the appointment process began, rather than now, after we have been told of the letters that have been exchanged between the Home Secretary, her officials and Mrs Woolf. I will be writing to the Home Secretary today to ask her for further information about the appointment of Fiona Woolf. But I think it's also going to be helpful to the public if we hear from Fiona Woolf again, and therefore I've written to her to ask her to come before the committee on Tuesday to clarify a number of points, but also to ensure that we get a reaction from her to what has happened over the last week. So I think the recall will be helpful in order to determine precisely where she wants to go in respect of this matter. But at the moment, this is very much up to Mrs Woolf. She's now got an opportunity to reflect on her position, to look at what has happened since she gave evidence to the Home Affairs Select Committee, and to make a decision herself as to what she thinks is in the best interests of this inquiry.
Well, I just wonder, on the strength of what you've just said, and you're talking about a timetable which takes us as far forward as Tuesday, potentially, when you would like to hear from her, given that we now have a group of survivors and survivors' representatives saying in the clearest terms that they do not want her to chair this inquiry, surely that takes us beyond anything that you've just described. She would have to reconsider her situation as of now, would she not?
Well, of course, we're not inviting her to come on Tuesday so she can resign in front of the committee. That's not the purpose of the committee. What we want to do is to clarify any outstanding points. I was not at the meeting today, so I don't know what was said. She will presumably get a report. The first and foremost consideration is for her to make a decision as to whether or not she wants to continue. I don't believe that anyone else can make that decision for her. She's heard the views of the victims' groups, which are, according to what you've just told me, pretty strong. She's heard our comments on the select committee at the hearing and what I've had to say on the 7 drafts of the letter that was sent from her to the Home Secretary. I think that whole process was chaotic, really. But it's for her. She needs to now consider what she has to say.
No, I get that, but
do.
what do you still need to clarify?
Well, there are a number of issues. For example, we have not put to her what the victims' groups have said. We can't, unfortunately, do it through the media. This has to be done in a proper and appropriate way. This is a parliamentary committee, so although, of course, we talk about these issues on the media, at the end of the day, people need to come before the committee to answer questions, especially as they're not making themselves available in other respects. We are very concerned about the timing of all that has happened. As you know, we were worried about the expertise that was displayed to us on Tuesday of last week, and we felt that this inquiry ought to have started already, given the lessons that had been learned or should have been learned after the Butler Schloss resignation. We thought this should have been handled in a more appropriate way. So it's process. It's now in her court. She must make a decision based on what has happened today. And you may be right, matters may move on before Tuesday, but that is what we've asked her to do,
so
because that's when we meet. We don't meet at weekends.
Indeed, no, I appreciate that. Just to be clear before we end the conversation, are you saying at this point she should stand down from this?
It's up to her to decide. We didn't appoint her. We had no part in the process of appointing her. This was the Home Secretary's decision, and she took the advice of her civil servants, who were busy drafting letters for Mrs. Woolf to write to their own boss. Now, I'm not going to tell people what to do. It's up to them to decide, but I think the weight of evidence is clear. She is a distinguished lawyer, so when she looks at the balance sheet at the end of this week, I think she'll know what to do. She doesn't need me to tell her.
OK, that's clear. Keith Vaz, thank you very much indeed.